On this Thursday night, hospitals pushed to the brink. An acceleration in admissions that could lead to canceled surgeries.
We have to avoid the worst-case scenario at all costs.
Stark messaging in the U.S. Do not travel for Thanksgiving. With exponential growth of COVID-19, is it too little, too late? And the pandemic's painful toll in Europe.
That is one person dying every 17 seconds.
Another scathing report about the RCMP.
I still hear from women all the time who are in some level of hell in the RCMP.
The toxic and hateful culture and questions about whether it can ever change. Plus, surprise stowaway, the tiny owl rescued from the Rockefeller Center Christmas tree.
Global National with Donna Friesen.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. We were warned earlier this fall of the possible consequences of a second wave. Now it's happening. With case numbers surging across much of Canada, hospital beds are filling up and dozens of Canadians are dying from the virus every day. You only have to look south to see what happens when the virus spreads out of control. Across the U.S., hospital ICUs are filling up. They're running out of staff. Morgues are running out of room. Here in Canada, we have not reached that point, but in hotspots, the situation is deteriorating fast. In Ontario, in just the last week, the number of people in intensive care jumped 49%. According to the Ontario Hospital Association, there are now 150 COVID patients in ICU. The government had warned that 150 was the limit for ICUs. After that, other surgeries would have to be cancelled. The human toll is rising.
When we listen to the number of people in the intensive care unit, these people are extremely unwell, and it's really important to remember that while we talk about numbers, as said, these are individuals.
In Manitoba, the whole province is already in the red zone. The test positivity rate there is 14%. 8 more people died today, and hospitalizations are surging. The province's top doctors said they had no choice but to impose even tighter restrictions on people's lives. As of midnight, Manitobans cannot enter a house they don't live in, and businesses can only sell essential items in store.
Remember that the right to shop is not as important as the right to life. And we're bringing these difficult measures forward today to protect people.
Stay home, don't socialize with people outside your household, and leave for essential reasons only.
And in BC, sweeping new restrictions are coming into force. Starting today and until December 7th, the entire province is being told not to meet with anyone outside their household. All community events are suspended. Enforcement of public health orders is being stepped up. And the province's top doctor is urging people to stop non-essential travel.
So now we need to do more. We need to keep our essential service, our essential activities open and operating safely. We need to keep our schools open and operating safely, and our workplaces that can be open safely, open. And we need to relieve the stress on our healthcare system right now.
Global's Keith Baldrey has details about the new restrictions. Keith?
Yes, Donna, with the virus surging in British Columbia, public health officials taking measures to control the gathering of people for social occasions, basically extending throughout the entire province a public health order that was brought down last week forbidding people from visiting each other's homes. You've got to stay within your own household. Another big move announced today is the mandatory mask wearing will now be required in retail establishments. That's been a hot button issue in British Columbia and other jurisdictions as well. So for the next 2 weeks, you have to wear a mask if you go into a retail establishment. Also, no religious services to be offered for the next 2 weeks in churches and temples. Significant moves for around the province to try to contain the surge of this virus, which is now tracking upwards of 700 cases a day. Donna?
All right, Keith Baldrey in Victoria tonight. Thanks. The Premier of Quebec is proposing a plan to allow families to gather over Christmas. François Legault says groups of up to 10 people will be allowed to get together over a 4-day period, but only if they self-isolate for a week before and a week after. That means students will have to learn from home for several days before the holiday.
We'll need strength to get through this pandemic, and to find this strength, we need our families.
Other provinces have considered extending the winter break for schools. There have been cases of COVID-19 inside schools, but often it is people who have been infected in the community. Transmission inside schools themselves is limited, and keeping kids home the way New York City has can lead to other problems. Mike Drolet reports on what we know at this stage of the pandemic.
Morning, any fever?
With Ontario caught in the undertow of the second wave of COVID-19, talk has turned to the possibility of another lockdown. And the one untouchable for most parents, schools.
It's a disaster for parents who have to rearrange their whole schedules to take care of their kids when they should be in school.
The debate has turned ugly in New York City, which closed its schools when the city's positivity rate hit 3%, a decision largely considered to be politically fueled. Toronto's rate, by comparison, is at 6%, yet there's no debate for Ontario Premier Doug Ford.
The safest place for our children right now are actually in the schools.
Outside the schools is another matter entirely, with positivity numbers in and around Toronto hitting record highs. One Peel Region neighborhood has topped 20%. And health officials are concerned with a recent positivity rate spike among high school and university-age students. Overall, 14% of Ontario's schools have seen at least one case. But what the numbers don't say is that the vast majority of those cases were acquired in the community, not the schools.
Can I give some space?
So the science supports keeping schools open, but health officials are keeping a close eye on two areas: community outbreaks and hospital capacity. Dr. Raywat Dianandan says there's a threshold where the recommendation will change.
If it looks like we are getting to the stage where hallway medicine is a norm and there's no sign of diminishment, then we should strongly consider taking all super spreading opportunities off the table, including schools.
The good news for parents is the Ontario government has made it clear keeping schools open is a priority. Mike Drolet, Global News, Toronto.
To other news now, another review of the RCMP has reached a scathing conclusion. The independent review by former Supreme Court Justice Michelle Bastarache concludes the culture of the RCMP is toxic and tolerates misogynistic and homophobic attitudes. More than 3,000 people came forward with detailed stories of assault, bullying, and despair. Many of them received compensation through a class action lawsuit that paid out more than $125 million. Today's report is called Broken Dreams, Broken Lives, and some of the details are disturbing. It says the problems are so deep and systemic that fundamental change cannot come from within the force. Carolyn Jarvis reports.
Their stories include horrific accounts of sexual assault, degrading comments, and unwelcome touching. Acts that occurred over decades to more than 2,300 women who worked for the RCMP. The level of violence and sexual assault that was reported was shocking, writes Justice Bastarache in his report. Over 130 claimants disclose penetrative sexual assaults.
After all our work and all our fighting, here it is, bound and brutal.
For many, the harassment haunts them to this day.
It's not just that their careers were shattered, their lives were shattered, their relationships were destroyed, their ability to work was destroyed.
The reports says there were women who sat with their service revolvers in their mouths and were only stopped from killing themselves when they thought of their children or their pets. Another RCMP employee who filed a claim for the settlement did die by suicide.
I still hear from women all the time who are in some level of hell in the RCMP, and there's a potent minority within the force that's ruining that organization.
In the strongest language, Justice Bastarache says the RCMP has proven incapable of fixing itself. The time has come for an in-depth external and independent review of the organization. The Force's commissioner wouldn't address that recommendation head-on, but denounced the behavior.
There is no place in my organization for discrimination, sexual assault, harassment, bullying, sexism, racism, homophobia, or transphobia. It will not be tolerated, and employees will be held to account.
The RCMP announced it will open a Centre for Harassment Resolution next summer, staffed by civilians. But the concern for some, including Justice Bastarache, is that the issues within the RCMP are so entrenched, it may take breaking up the force to end it. Carolyn Jarvis, Global News, Toronto.
And it's important to note the lawsuit is one of two significant class action settlements related to gender-based harassment inside the RCMP. The other is for non-policing employees within the force. That settlement is accepting claims until January 12th. To some breaking news from Ontario tonight, a police officer and a civilian are dead after a shooting. It happened on Manitoulin Island in Lake Huron, about 6 hours northwest of Toronto. Investigators say police were sent to investigate an unwanted man on a property in Gore Bay. Police say Constable Mark Hoving, a 28-year veteran of the Ontario Provincial Police, was shot when he got there. Police say a man on the property was also shot and died after he was taken to the hospital. The federal environment minister has introduced legislation that sets targets for emission reduction, plans that in theory would fulfill a promise made in the last election. The Liberals vowed to be more aggressive at cutting greenhouse gas emissions and get Canada to net zero emissions by 2050. But Canada has set multiple goals for curbing emissions and has not met any of them. So is this proposed law going to do it? As Abigail Beeman reports, the ambitious plan lacks detail.
Making Canada net zero by 2050, an ambitious goal now legally binding, at least on paper.
Bill C-12 lays out a framework of accountability and transparency that will ensure we reach this goal in a way that gives Canadians confidence.
How they plan to do it remains a mystery. The new bill is based around 5-year milestones. The government has to set an emissions reduction target and a plan to achieve it every 5 years. But the first milestone isn't until 2030, and we don't know the plan to get there either.
We have committed to exceeding our 2030 targets.
There is no plan for getting us to net zero. There is very little accountability, and it's really just a game of smoke and mirrors.
There are no legal consequences for missing a target. Still, environmental groups call legislating net zero a big step forward.
This government has its work cut out for it. Not only does it need to improve this piece of accountability legislation, but it needs to be working on a strong climate action plan that makes sure that we stop breaking our promises to the world.
The Liberals made the net zero promise during the last federal election campaign and were defensive then about a lack of details.
I'm not going to stand here and say what our exact plan is to 2050 because we need to make that plan with experts.
While creating an expert task force is also now enshrined in law, it doesn't yet exist.
If they consult directly with the oil and ONG industry, I think there may be some novel ideas coming forward from that group on how to, in fact, reduce emissions.
The Prime Minister wouldn't answer why he doesn't have a 2025 target. Environmentalists are calling for one. And while the government has given itself up to 9 months after the bill passes to offer details on the 2030 targets, the Environment Minister is promising more details in a matter of weeks. Abigail Beeman, Global News, Ottawa.
Canada is one of a number of nations promising to be carbon neutral by the middle of the century. Climate change has been eclipsed by the more immediate crisis of the coronavirus, but it doesn't mean political leaders can take their foot off the accelerator. And now political change in the U.S. is spurring many nations to renew their calls to take action. Eric Sorensen reports.
Japan's parliament today declared a climate emergency. The vote, those who stood, shows a dramatic consensus on this global crisis. Britain this week moved up a ban on gasoline-fueled cars to 2030. And the world's largest carbon emitter, China, promises to be carbon neutral by 2060 and called this month for greater international cooperation. That opportunity may be at hand. Above all, global leaders see the election of a new U.S. president as an opportunity to accelerate climate action.
It is time for a new transatlantic agenda fit for today's world.
We all have a collective responsibility. There I see common ground.
The change in Washington couldn't be more stark. From this,
we saved our oil industry, and now it's very vibrant again.
To a new message.
By 2050, the United States will be 100% clean energy economy with net zero emissions.
Joe Biden is proposing a $2 trillion plan to shift from oil and coal towards wind and other renewables. And no country more than Canada is positioned to take advantage of cross-border cooperation on clean energy.
Canadian workers and their families are going to benefit from clean growth.
Having a Biden-Harris administration in the U.S. provides that, friendly, almost competition to be able to seize the opportunities that this low carbon economy sector represents.
Canada faces homegrown challenges in going green as a major carbon producer. But the change in Washington, like Biden's plan to rejoin the Paris Climate Agreement, is refocusing much of the world.
Above all, climate change.
Boris Johnson seems more than ready for Joe Biden.
He wants to join us next year in leading the world in getting global greenhouse emissions down.
As the world takes new steps to reduce carbon emissions, it also welcomes America's re-engagement on climate change. Eric Sorensen, Global News, Toronto.
Americans urged to stay home for Thanksgiving. Coming up, the serious warning of aggressive and unrelenting community spread. A week before American Thanksgiving, and the U.S. Centers for Disease Control is finally telling people to stay home. Big gatherings will add fuel to what's already a raging fire. There are now an average of 160,000 new cases every day in the U.S. Hospitalizations have hit an all-time high, nearly 80,000, and yesterday, over 1,800 Americans died. Jackson Proskow on the latest projections of where the U.S. is headed.
In their first public briefing since July, members of the White House Coronavirus Task Force painted a grim picture.
This is more cases more rapidly than what we had seen before.
Since the last task force briefing, another 120,000 Americans have died. This internal White House document shows the areas with the highest rate of cases and warns of aggressive, unrelenting community spread across the entire country.
I believe the day is coming soon when we will put this coronavirus in the past.
The surge in cases is so rapid, the Centers for Disease Control is warning Americans not to travel for the Thanksgiving holiday, typically the busiest travel time of the year.
When you have so much virus circulating in the community, everybody needs to do their part to stay home unless it's absolutely necessary to go out.
In Idaho, doctors warn they'll soon face tough choices about who they can treat as they face a dire shortage of hospital beds.
We may be facing that scenario in December.
The Mayo Clinic reports 900 of its staff have contracted the virus in the past 2 weeks. The situation risks spiraling out of control in multiple states.
Open!
But not everyone is on board with public health measures.
All they're trying to do is control you. Everything you do is based on the mask and the disease, and it's wrong.
In South Dakota, where the positivity rate is one of the highest in the world, the governor refuses to implement a mask mandate.
I don't want to approach a policy or a mandate just looking to make people feel good.
Experts say that lack of a unified national response is what makes the prolonged silence from the White House so dangerous. At a time when the U.S. needs leadership the most, it's been hard to find. Donna?
Okay, Jackson Proskow in Washington, thanks. Ahead, hospitals in Europe close to the breaking point. Much of Europe is in the grip of a second wave of COVID-19 now. The World Health Organization says Europe now accounts for 28% of cases in the world and 26% of all deaths. Crystal Gamansing reports.
Intensive care units in Switzerland are at capacity. Geneva University Hospital is shuttling patients to other facilities. The hospital director says we are still in a situation that puts the healthcare system under a lot of pressure. And they're not alone. ICUs in France have been at 95% capacity for the past 10 days. Spain and Italy are also seeing more critically ill patients.
Last week, Europe registered over 29,000 new COVID-19 deaths. That is one person dying every 17 seconds in the European region.
Dr. Hans Klug is urging people to stick with protective measures.
Your country, community, family and friends need you like they have never needed you before.
He says only about 60% of the European population is wearing a mask. In a move that could increase numbers, Spain's health minister reduced the price of face coverings to 62 cents.
With transmission rates out of control, millions of people are living with restrictions. England should be moving out of lockdown on December 2nd, but Christmas could change that. There's talk household mixing might be allowed over the holidays, but that could extend the lockdown into January.
Saying to families you can have a reasonably normal family Christmas, but then putting restrictions in place which may well impact their livelihoods, I don't think is going to be a very welcome Christmas present.
Right now, a third of European countries are reporting very high infection rates of more than 700 cases per 100,000 people. Crystal Gamansing, Global News, London.
Up next, an unexpected traveler in the time of COVID. When I got started in TV news, I thought it was a bit silly to put cute animal stories at the end of the news. Well, I'm much older now and COVID and everything, so now I crave cute animal stories. The one tonight is not a partridge in a pear tree, but it's close. This tiny owl was found stuck inside the Rockefeller Center Christmas tree in New York City. A construction worker spotted it, rescued it, put it in a cardboard box, and it's now recovering at a wildlife rehab center. It's a northern saw-whet, the smallest owl in North America. Workers say they did check the tree for wildlife before they wrapped it, but they didn't spot the little owl. It went 3 days with no water or food, but it's now had a buffet of mice and is said to be doing well. It's been named Rockefeller, and it's outshining the Christmas tree itself, which, let's face it, looks a little ragged. New Yorkers say it's a metaphor for 2020. And that is Global National for this Thursday. I'm Donna Friesen. Tonight's Your Canada is Lillooet, BC. We'd love to see your Canada. Please send it to viewers@globalnational.com. Thanks for watching. Hope to see you here again tomorrow. Take care of yourselves. Bye-bye.